The first time I realized my electric bill had doubled was when I opened the envelope in my kitchen and nearly choked on my coffee. I had been living in my house in the Pinewood Heights subdivision outside Denver, Colorado for 3 years now, and my bills had always been consistent. I was a single guy, worked from home as a software developer, and my monthly electricity costs rarely exceeded $200 even during the coldest winter months. But this bill showed $473. I checked the dates 3 times, thinking maybe they had charged me for 2 months by mistake. Nope, just January. 1 month. My name is Jensen, and I have always been the type of person who minds his own business. I bought this modest 3-bedroom house because it was affordable, had good internet infrastructure for my work, and the mountains were close enough for weekend hiking trips. The homeowner association fees were reasonable at $50 a month, and in 3 years, I had maybe attended 2 HOA meetings total. I paid my dues on time, kept my lawn presentable, and expected everyone to leave me alone. That was the deal, or so I thought. I called the electric company immediately. A woman named Sandra answered after I navigated through their automated system for what felt like an eternity. "Hi, I am calling about my electric bill. There must be some kind of error. It is more than double what I usually pay." Sandra asked for my account number, and I heard her typing on her keyboard. "Mr. Jensen, I am looking at your account now. The meter reading is correct. Your usage was significantly higher this month. That does not make any sense. I have not changed anything about how I live. I did not leave my heat running constantly or buy any new appliances." More typing. "Well, according to our records, your consumption spiked starting around December 20th. It has been consistently higher since then." December 20th. I tried to remember if anything had happened around that time. Then it hit me. That was right after the HOA meeting I had actually skipped. I had received a notice in my mailbox about some infrastructure updates, but I had honestly just tossed it on my desk and forgotten about it. "Is there any way to see exactly when the spikes in usage are occurring?" I asked. "You can log into your online account and see hourly usage data. That might help you figure out what is causing the increase." I thanked her and hung up, immediately pulling up my laptop. After logging into the electric company's website, I navigated to the detailed usage report. What I saw made my jaw drop. The massive consumption spikes were happening 24 hours a day, but they were consistent, not fluctuating like they would if I had accidentally left something running. This was a constant draw of additional power, every single hour, starting exactly on December 20th at 2 in the afternoon. I sat back in my chair, trying to think. What could possibly be drawing that much power continuously? I walked through my house, checking every room, every outlet, every appliance. Everything was normal. My heating system was running like it always did. My computer equipment was the same as always. Nothing had changed. That was when I remembered the small utility shed on the back corner of my property. The previous owner had mentioned something about it being partially on the property line, shared in some complicated arrangement with the HOA for drainage or water management. I had never paid much attention to it because it was locked with an HOA padlock and was not really on the usable part of my yard. It sat in a weedy corner behind my fence line, and I had honestly kind of forgotten it existed. I grabbed my coat and walked out into the cold January afternoon. The temperature was hovering around 23 degrees, and patches of old snow covered the ground. I made my way to the back of my property, past my small detached garage, and found the utility shed. It was maybe 8 feet by 10 feet, with peeling brown paint and a metal roof. I walked around it, and that was when I noticed something I had never seen before. There was a new electrical conduit running from the meter on the side of my house, across my yard, and into this shed. My heart started pounding. I followed the conduit back to my meter and found a secondary connection that definitely had not been there when I moved in. Someone had tapped into my electrical service to power whatever was in that shed. I tried the padlock on the shed door, but it was solid. I was not about to break HOA property, so I pulled out my phone and took several pictures of everything. The shed, the conduit, the connection at my meter, all of it. Then I marched back inside and started digging through my pile of mail until I found the HOA contact information. The HOA president was listed as Karen Whitmore, and there was a phone number. I called it immediately, my anger building with each ring. "Hello," a woman's voice answered, sounding irritated that someone had dared to call her. "Hi, is this Karen Whitmore, the HOA president?" "Yes. Who is calling?" "This is Lucas Jensen from 847 Pinewood Drive. I just got my electric bill and discovered that someone has tapped into my electrical service without my permission. There is a conduit running from my meter to the utility shed on my property, and I need to know what is going on." There was a pause. "Oh yes, that was discussed at the December meeting. Did you not attend?" "No, I did not. But that does not give anyone the right to use my electricity without asking me or compensating me for it." Her voice took on that particular tone that I would come to know very well over the next few months. Condescending, dismissive, and absolutely certain of her own righteousness. "Mr. Jensen, that pump house services the drainage system for the entire subdivision. The HOA board made the decision to have it heated through the winter to prevent the pipes from freezing. Your property was the most convenient location for the electrical connection. You cannot just decide to use my electricity and stick me with the bill. That is theft." "Excuse me, but according to the HOA bylaws, any infrastructure necessary for the common good of the community can be maintained using reasonable means. The board determined that a small electrical connection was reasonable." A small connection. My bill more than doubled. "That is over $250 of electricity you have stolen from me in 1 month." "Stolen is a very strong word, Mr. Jensen. The HOA serves the community, and sometimes homeowners need to make small sacrifices for the greater good. I suggest you review your bylaws." This is all perfectly legal. My hands were shaking with anger. "I did not agree to this. You need to disconnect from my power immediately, or I will be forced to disconnect it myself." Now her voice went ice cold. "If you interfere with HOA infrastructure, you will be fined according to the enforcement provisions in the bylaws. I would strongly advise against taking any action. The board will discuss possible compensation at the next meeting in February." February. That is another month away. I am not paying for another month of this. Then I suggest you attend the meeting and voice your concerns through the proper channels. "Good day, Mr. Jensen." She hung up. I stood there in my kitchen, staring at my phone in disbelief. This could not be legal. There was no way an HOA could just decide to tap into my personal utilities and stick me with the bill without my consent. I spent the next several hours researching Colorado HOA law. What I found was both enlightening and disturbing. HOAs in Colorado had broad powers, but they were not unlimited. They could not simply take a homeowner's resources without compensation. However, the bylaws of each HOA could vary significantly, and enforcement of violations was often a complicated legal process. I dug out my closing documents from when I bought the house and found my copy of the HOA bylaws. It was a 47-page document written in dense legal language that I had honestly never read thoroughly. I made a pot of coffee and started working through it. Most of it was standard stuff about lawn maintenance, fence restrictions, and architectural approval processes. But buried in Section 23, I found what Karen had been referring to. It stated that the HOA board could utilize reasonable community resources for the maintenance of common infrastructure, with appropriate compensation to be determined by the board. The key word there was compensation. They were supposed to pay me back, but Karen had made it sound like that was optional and would be decided at their leisure. I kept reading and found Section 31, which dealt with dispute resolution. Any homeowner with a complaint against the HOA had to submit it in writing, wait for a board response, and then could request mediation before any legal action could be taken. I looked at the calendar. It was January 17th. The next HOA meeting was February 14th. If I followed their process, I would be paying for another month of electricity before anything even got discussed. Then they could drag out the compensation determination for who knows how long. I pulled up my electric usage data again and did some calculations. Based on the current draw, I was looking at another $250 to $300 for February. That was $500 to $600 total that these people expected me to just absorb while they took their time deciding if maybe they might eventually pay me back. No. Absolutely not. I started researching what my options were. Technically, the electrical connection to my meter was on my property. The meter itself belonged to the electric company, but the service connection was mine. If I wanted to disconnect something drawing power from my system, that was within my rights as the property owner. But I could already hear Karen's shrill voice threatening me with fines for interfering with HOA infrastructure. I needed to be smart about this. I spent the evening documenting everything. I created a detailed spreadsheet of my electric usage before December 20th and after. I calculated the exact additional cost. I took more photos of the connection. I even went back outside with a flashlight and got pictures of the conduit path and how it had been installed. Someone had done a halfway decent job of running it along my fence line, but they had definitely entered my property without permission and modified my electrical system without a permit. That gave me an idea. In the morning, I called the Denver County Building Department. Building permits, this is Michael. Hi, I have a question about electrical work permits. If someone runs new electrical service to a structure, that requires a permit, right? Yes, any new electrical installation requires a permit and inspection. What is the nature of the work? Someone ran a new line from my house meter to a shed on my property. I did not do it, and I never saw any permit notice posted. There was a pause. If electrical work was done on your property without your authorization, that is a code violation and possibly trespassing. Do you know who did the work? My homeowner association. They did it to power a pump house. Okay, that is still required to be permitted. Can you give me your address? I can check if a permit was filed. I gave him my address and waited while he looked it up. After a few minutes, he came back on the line. I am not showing any electrical permits for your address in the past year. If work was done without a permit, you can file a complaint and we will send an inspector out. What happens if they find unpermitted work? The property owner or the person who did the work can be cited and fined. They would be required to bring everything up to code and get a proper permit, or remove the work entirely. This was getting better. And if it is not brought up to code, then it would need to be disconnected until proper permits and inspections are completed. I filed the complaint right there on the phone. Michael told me an inspector would contact me within 3 business days to schedule a site visit. I felt a small sense of satisfaction, but I knew this was just the beginning. I drafted a formal letter to the HOA board, citing the sections of the bylaws they were violating by failing to provide immediate compensation, and demanding reimbursement for all electricity costs related to the pump house, plus disconnection of the unauthorized service within 10 days. I sent it certified mail, return receipt requested. Then I waited. 2 days later, I got a call from a building inspector named Tom Rodriguez. He scheduled a visit for the following morning. I took the morning off work to meet him. Tom was a no-nonsense guy in his 50s with a clipboard and a county truck. I showed him the electrical connection and the conduit running to the pump house. He examined it carefully, took photos, and made notes. This is definitely unpermitted work. Do you know when it was installed? Based on my electric bills, late December, around the 20th, he nodded. The installation actually looks professionally done, which makes it worse. Someone who knows how to do electrical work should definitely know they need permits. The problem here is that this is drawing power from your meter, which means you are paying for it, but you did not authorize the work. That is exactly my complaint. The HOA just decided to do this without asking me. Tom shook his head. HOA. I see this kind of thing more often than you would think. They get a little power and think they can do whatever they want. He finished his notes. I am going to issue a violation notice to the HOA. They will have 30 days to either get a proper permit and inspection or remove the connection. In the meantime, you are within your rights to disconnect it yourself since it is an unpermitted modification to your electrical system. Really, I can disconnect it. It is your meter, your service connection, and unpermitted work. Yes. However, I would document everything and maybe send the HOA notice first so they cannot claim you did not warn them. I like Tom, the inspector who actually understands property rights. He smiled. I also live in an HOA neighborhood, different county, but I get it. Just make sure you are careful if you disconnect it yourself. If you are not comfortable working with electrical, hire someone licensed. After Tom left, I felt a surge of confidence. I had the building inspector on my side. I had documented everything. I had followed the proper channels. Now I just had to wait for the HOA's response. I did not have to wait long. The next afternoon, I found a letter taped to my front door. It was not in an envelope, just folded paper taped right to the door where anyone walking by could see it. I pulled it down and unfolded it. Notice of violation was printed at the top in large red letters. Below that, it stated that I was in violation of HOA Bylaws Section 42, subsection D, for filing frivolous complaints against the HOA with outside agencies. I was being fined $500, and if the fine was not paid within 10 days, a lien would be placed on my property. I could not believe what I was reading. They were fining me for calling the building inspector. I went back inside and looked up Section 42, subsection D. It stated that homeowners could be fined for actions that damage the reputation or interests of the HOA community. This was insane. I had not damaged anything. I had reported an actual code violation that they had committed. I pulled out my phone and called the number for Karen Whitmore again. This time I got voicemail. Karen, this is Lucas Jensen. I just received your ridiculous violation notice. You cannot fine me for reporting your illegal activity to the county. Remove this fine immediately and disconnect from my electrical service, or I will be taking further action. I hung up and immediately started drafting another letter. This one was going to every member of the HOA board, not just Karen. I looked up the HOA registration with the county and found the names of all 5 board members. Karen Whitmore was the president. The vice president was a man named Gerald Thompson. The other 3 members were listed as Sandra Hutchins, Michael Perry, and Deanne Foster. I wrote a detailed letter explaining the situation, the unpermitted electrical work, the lack of compensation, and the retaliatory fine for reporting a code violation. I printed 5 copies and mailed them to each board member's address, again via certified mail. Then I went back to the county website and started researching what my legal options were. It turned out that in Colorado, HOAs could be sued in small claims court for amounts up to $7,500. I was nowhere near that yet, but the retaliatory fine was potentially illegal under state law. Colorado had specific statutes protecting homeowners from retaliation for reporting code violations. I was seriously considering calling a lawyer when my doorbell rang. It was early evening and I was not expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and saw a woman I did not recognize standing on my porch. She looked to be in her 60s, wearing a puffy winter coat. I opened the door. "Can I help you? Are you Lucas Jensen?" "Yes." "I am Diane Foster. I am on the HOA board. I got your letter today and I wanted to talk to you in person if you have a few minutes." This was unexpected. I invited her in and we sat in my living room. She looked uncomfortable. "I want to start by saying that I did not know about the electrical connection to your property. Karen sent an email in December saying she had arranged for the pump house to be heated for the winter, but she did not mention that it was being connected to your power. I thought the HOA was paying for it." I felt a small ray of hope. "So you are saying the board did not actually vote on this?" She nodded. "There was a vote on heating the pump house, but the way Karen presented it, she made it sound like it would be a minimal cost to the HOA budget. She got 3 votes in favor, which was enough to pass, but she never said anything about using a homeowner's electricity without compensation." "Who voted in favor?" "Karen, Gerald, and Sandra. Michael and I voted against it because we thought it was an unnecessary expense." "Do you have the meeting minutes that show that?" "I can get them for you, but that is not the main reason I came here." She took a deep breath. "I also wanted to warn you, Karen is. She has been president for 4 years now and she has gotten increasingly controlling. She thinks the HOA is her personal kingdom. When I heard she issued a fine against you for calling the building inspector, I knew that was wrong. You have every right to report code violations. Is there anything you can do as a board member to stop this?" "I can call for a special meeting to discuss it, but Karen controls the agenda. She and Gerald are close, and Sandra usually goes along with whatever Karen wants. It is like a little dictatorship." She looked genuinely distressed. "Several homeowners have had problems with her over the years, but most people just pay the fines or give up because fighting the HOA is expensive and exhausting." "Well, I am not giving up. They stole my electricity, and now they are trying to fine me for reporting their illegal activity." "That is not happening." Deanne smiled for the first time. "Good. I was hoping you would fight. Maybe this is what it takes to finally get Karen out of power. If you need any documentation from the board meetings or any support, let me know. I will help however I can." After she left, I felt a strange mix of vindication and concern. It was good to know that not everyone on the board was corrupt, but the fact that Karen apparently ran things like a dictator was troubling. How many other homeowners had been bullied into submission? I decided it was time to meet my neighbors. In 3 years, I had been pretty isolated, working from home and keeping to myself. But if Karen had been abusing her power for years, maybe other people had stories to tell. The next day was Saturday. I made a point to walk around the neighborhood and strike up conversations. Pinewood Heights had about 60 homes, and I started with the houses closest to mine. My immediate neighbor to the left was a retired couple, the Martins. I had waved to them plenty of times but never really talked. I knocked on their door and Mrs. Martin answered. Hi, I am Lucas from next door. I wanted to introduce myself properly and ask if you have a few minutes to talk about the HOA. Her expression immediately shifted from friendly to wary. What about the HOA? I am having some issues with Karen Whitmore and the board. I wanted to know if other people have had problems too. She glanced back into her house, then stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind her. She lowered her voice. Do not let anyone know I said this, but yes, a lot of people have had problems with Karen. She has fined at least a dozen families for petty things. My husband put up a small tool shed 3 years ago, and even though it met all the size requirements in the bylaws, Karen said it was an unapproved structure and fined us $300. We fought it, but she threatened to put a lien on our house, so we just paid. That is exactly the kind of thing she is trying to do to me. Have you talked to other neighbors about this? Not really. Everyone is afraid of retaliation. If you speak out against the HOA, she finds something else to fine you for. It is easier to just keep your head down and pay your dues. I talked to 5 more families that day, and I heard similar stories from almost all of them. Excessive fines for minor violations, arbitrary enforcement of rules, threats of liens and legal action. One family, the Rodriguezes, had been fined $800 because their teenage son had left a basketball hoop in the driveway overnight, which apparently violated some rule about recreational equipment storage. By the end of the day, I had a clear picture. Karen Whitmore had been running Pinewood Heights like her personal fiefdom for years, and most people were too intimidated or exhausted to fight back. That night, I created a private Facebook group called Pinewood Heights Homeowners Discussion and sent invitations to everyone I had talked to, plus several other neighbors whose names I had gotten. I made it a secret group so Karen would not see it. Within 24 hours, 32 people had joined. The stories that started pouring in were infuriating. Karen had been abusing her power in countless ways, but the common thread was always the same. She would threaten liens and legal action, and people would give in because fighting was too expensive and stressful. But here is the thing about bullies. They are only effective when their victims are isolated. Once people start comparing notes and standing together, the bully's power disappears. I posted a detailed account of what had happened to me. The unauthorized electrical connection, the doubled electric bill, the lack of compensation, the retaliatory fine, and the building inspector's findings. I included all my documentation and photos. The response was overwhelming. People were angry on my behalf, but more importantly, they started talking about taking collective action. Someone suggested a class action lawsuit. Someone else mentioned contacting a local news station. A woman named Patricia suggested filing complaints with the state HOA regulatory board. I spent Sunday researching Colorado's HOA laws more thoroughly. It turned out there was a state HOA information and resource center that handled complaints against HOA boards. I filed a formal complaint online, detailing everything Karen had done. Monday morning, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Gerald Thompson, the HOA vice president. Mr. Jensen, I am calling to discuss your recent communications with the board members. Okay, what about them? Your letters have caused significant disruption, and the board feels that your tone has been unnecessarily aggressive. We would like to schedule a meeting with you to resolve this situation amicably. I would be happy to meet, but my conditions are simple. Disconnect from my electrical service immediately and reimburse me for all electricity costs. Also, rescind the bogus fine you issued for reporting your code violation. The fine is a separate issue. That was issued according to the bylaws. The fine is retaliation, and it is illegal under Colorado law. If you do not rescind it, I will be filing additional complaints." His voice got harder. "Mr. Jensen, you need to understand that fighting the HOA is not in your best interest. We have significant legal resources, and we can make things very difficult for you." Is that a threat? It is a reality check. The board has authorized up to $15,000 in legal fees to defend against frivolous actions. How much can you afford to spend on lawyers? I felt my anger rising, but I kept my voice calm. "I have documented everything you have done. Unpermitted electrical work, theft of utilities, retaliatory fines. I have building inspectors, state agencies, and now about 30 of my neighbors who are all comparing notes on years of HOA abuse. So here is my reality check for you. If you do not fix this immediately, I am going to make sure everyone knows what Karen has been doing, and I am going to push for the entire board to be replaced." There was a long silence. Then Gerald said, "You have made your position clear. The board will discuss this at our next meeting." He hung up. I was shaking with adrenaline. The HOA was trying to intimidate me with threats of legal action, but I was not backing down. That afternoon, I got an email from Tom Rodriguez, the building inspector. The violation notice had been officially issued to the HOA, and they had 30 days to comply. He also mentioned that the HOA had called the county to complain about him, but his supervisor had backed him up. The violation was legitimate, and the county would be monitoring to ensure compliance. I decided it was time to take direct action. If the HOA was not going to disconnect the electrical service, I would do it myself. Tom had confirmed I was within my rights. I just needed to be careful about how I did it. I am not an electrician, but I do understand basic electrical systems from my years working with computers and networking equipment. However, I was not about to mess with my main service panel without professional help. I called a local electrician and explained the situation. The electrician, a guy named Dave, came out the next day. I showed him the setup and he examined the connection at my meter. "Yeah, whoever did this knew what they were doing, but it is definitely unpermitted. You want me to disconnect it?" "Yes. Can you do it safely?" "Sure." "I will need to kill power to your house for about 30 minutes while I work, but it is a straightforward job. I will cap off the wires properly so there is no safety hazard." "How much?" "200 should cover it." I had Dave disconnect the pump house that afternoon. He removed the tap from my meter, capped all the wires properly, and gave me a receipt for the work. I took photos of everything before, during, and after the disconnection. Then I sent an email to all 5 HOA board members with the photos attached. As of today, I have disconnected the unauthorized electrical service to the HOA pump house. This was done by a licensed electrician, and is fully within my rights given that the original connection was unpermitted and unauthorized. If the HOA wishes to heat the pump house, you will need to arrange your own electrical service with the power company. I hit send and waited for the explosion. It came within 2 hours. Karen called my phone, and when I answered, she was practically screaming. "What have you done?" "You have damaged HOA property. Do you have any idea what it will cost if those pipes freeze and burst?" "That is not my problem, Karen. You should not have stolen my electricity. I am going to have you arrested for vandalism and destruction of property. Go ahead and call the police. I will show them the building inspector's violation notice, my documentation of the unpermitted work, and the receipt from the licensed electrician who disconnected it. I did everything legally. You are going to pay for this. The board will fine you for every day that pump house is without power. You cannot fine me for refusing to provide my electricity to the HOA. That is not in the bylaws, and any attempt to do so is further evidence of abuse of power. She sputtered for a moment, then said, "The February meeting is in 3 weeks. You had better show up, because the entire board is going to vote to put a lien on your property for damages. I will be there, and so will a lot of other homeowners who are tired of your abuse." She hung up on me. I immediately posted an update in the Facebook group about what I had done. The response was overwhelmingly supportive. People were amazed that I had actually stood up to Karen. Several people said they wished they had the courage to do the same. But then Patricia, the woman who had suggested filing state complaints, posted something concerning. "Everyone be careful. I just got a fine notice for having my Christmas decorations up past January 15th. I took them down on January 14th, but the notice says they saw them on the 16th. I think Karen is going after people in the Facebook group." That was followed by 2 more people reporting sudden fines for minor or questionable violations. It was clear that Karen was retaliating against anyone she suspected of being part of the opposition. This was escalating fast, and I realized that I needed to be more strategic. Fighting Karen one-on-one was not going to work. I needed to either get her removed from power or get enough board members on my side to overrule her. I reached out to Deanne Foster again and asked if there was any mechanism in the bylaws for removing a board member or calling for new elections. She sent me the relevant section. Board members served 2-year terms and elections were held in April. However, a special election could be called if 20% of homeowners signed a petition requesting it. 20% of 60 homes was 12 signatures. That was very doable. I drafted a petition calling for a special election of all HOA board positions, citing abuse of power, retaliatory fines, and unauthorized use of homeowner resources. I printed 20 copies and started going door to door. It took me 3 days, but I got 17 signatures. Some people were scared to sign, but enough were angry enough to take the risk. I submitted the petition to the board via certified mail and posted a copy in the Facebook group. The temperature in Pinewood Heights, both literal and figurative, was dropping fast. It was late January now, and we were getting into the coldest part of the Colorado winter. Overnight temperatures were regularly below 0, and we had gotten several significant snowfalls. I could not help but think about the pump house sitting in my backyard with no heat. I did not know exactly what the pipes in there serviced, but Karen had said it was for drainage. I figured that probably meant sump pumps or something related to groundwater management. Part of me felt bad that the pipes might freeze and burst, but the rational part of my brain reminded me that this was not my responsibility. The HOA had created this situation by stealing my electricity. They had plenty of options. They could run a generator, they could get the electrical work properly permitted and pay me for the usage, or they could have the power company install a separate meter. Instead, Karen was focused on punishing me. Then the temperature really dropped. There was a cold snap that sent temperatures plummeting to 15 below 0 at night. On the 3rd night of the cold snap, I was lying in bed when I heard a loud crack outside, followed by what sounded like rushing water. I got up and looked out my back window. I could not see much in the dark, but I grabbed a flashlight and went outside in my boots and bathrobe. As I approached the pump house, I could hear water spraying and see a growing pool of ice forming around the base of the structure. The pipes had frozen and burst. Water was spraying out from multiple locations in the pump house walls, and in the sub-zero temperature, it was freezing almost immediately, creating bizarre ice formations. I did not go too close because the footing was getting dangerously slippery, but I could see that this was a major rupture. I went back inside and called the County Emergency Services non-emergency line to report a water leak on HOA property. Then, I sent an email to all the board members with a photo of the ice formations and a brief description. The pump house pipes have frozen and burst. Emergency services has been notified. As I have previously stated, I am not responsible for providing heat to HOA infrastructure. Then I went back to bed. There was nothing more I could do, and honestly, I felt a strange sense of vindication. Actions have consequences, and Karen was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The next morning, I woke up to chaos. There were 2 county trucks and a small group of people standing around the pump house. I got dressed and went out to see what was happening. A county water department worker was talking to Karen, who looked like she had been up all night. Her hair was a mess, and she was wearing sweatpants and a coat that did not match. Gerald was there too, looking grim. When Karen saw me approaching, her face twisted with rage. "This is your fault. Do you see what you have done?" The county worker turned to me. "Are you the property owner?" "Yes, I am Lucas Jensen. I called this in last night." "Did you turn off the heat to this structure?" Karen interrupted before I could answer. "He disconnected the power. He deliberately sabotaged HOA property." I pulled out my phone and showed the county worker the photos of the unpermitted electrical connection and the building inspector's violation notice. The HOA tapped into my electrical service without permission and without permits. I had it disconnected legally after the county issued a violation. I am not responsible for heating HOA infrastructure. The county worker looked at Karen. "Madam, if the electrical connection was unpermitted and on his property, he has every right to disconnect it. This is an HOA issue, not a county issue. We shut off the water supply to prevent further damage, but you are going to need to get a plumber out here and deal with this yourself." Karen sputtered, but the county worker was already walking away. He and his colleague packed up their equipment and left. Gerald walked over to me, and for a moment I thought he might try to start something physical, but he just shook his head. "You have created a huge problem. That pump house services the drainage for 8 properties on this street. If we get significant rain or snowmelt, those basements are going to flood. Then I suggest you get it repaired quickly and arrange for your own power source. None of this is my problem. You created this situation." Karen had been on her phone, and now she marched back over. "I just talked to our HOA attorney. You are going to be sued for damages. The repair costs are going to be at least $10,000, and you are going to pay every penny. Good luck with that. I have documentation that you are the ones who committed multiple violations and crimes. Theft of utilities, unpermitted electrical work, and retaliatory fines. If you sue me, I will countersue and I will win." Over the next week, the situation in Pinewood Heights deteriorated rapidly. True to Gerald's warning, when we got a warm spell and some of the snow started melting, 3 houses reported water in their basements. The pump house was supposed to manage groundwater drainage, and without it functioning, the water had nowhere to go. The affected homeowners were furious, and they were not sure who to be mad at. Karen was telling everyone that I was responsible because I disconnected the power. I was telling everyone that the HOA was responsible for stealing my electricity and failing to maintain their own infrastructure properly. The Facebook group was blowing up with arguments. Some people agreed with me that the HOA had overstepped. Others thought I should have just paid the extra electricity cost to avoid all this damage. A few people were calling me selfish and destructive. But the tide started to turn when one of the affected homeowners, a man named Robert Chen, posted his own research. He had pulled the original subdivision plans from the county and discovered that the pump house was supposed to have its own dedicated electrical service from day one. Somewhere along the way, probably to save money, The HOA had never installed that service. Instead, they had been paying to heat the pump house with portable heaters during cold snaps, which was expensive. When Karen took over as president, she had apparently decided to cut costs by secretly tapping into my electricity. Robert posted copies of the original plans and a detailed breakdown of how the HOA had been cutting corners for years. This was exactly the kind of documentation I needed. I reached out to Robert privately and asked if he would be willing to speak at the February HOA meeting. He agreed immediately. He was angry about his flooded basement, but he understood that the root cause was HOA mismanagement, not my refusal to be stolen from. The special election petition I had submitted required the board to schedule a vote within 30 days. That meant it would likely happen at the February 14th meeting, which was now less than a week away. Karen tried one more tactic to intimidate me. I received a letter from a law firm in Denver, representing the Pinewood Heights HOA. It was a formal demand letter, claiming that I owed the HOA $12,000 in damages from the frozen pipes, plus ongoing costs for temporary drainage solutions. They gave me 10 days to pay or face a lawsuit. I took the letter to a lawyer. I had been avoiding legal costs, but this was serious enough that I needed professional advice. The lawyer I found, Jennifer Martinez, specialized in HOA disputes. I paid $300 for a consultation and brought all my documentation. Jennifer reviewed everything and smiled. "This is a slam dunk in your favor. The HOA committed theft of services, which is a criminal act in Colorado. They did unpermitted electrical work. They issued retaliatory fines, which violates state law. And now they are trying to blame you for damages that resulted from their own negligence. If they sue you, we will destroy them in court and you will likely be awarded attorney fees." Should I countersue now? She thought about it. Not yet. Let them make the first move. If they actually file a lawsuit, we will countersue for theft of services, harassment, and abuse of power. We will also move to have the entire board removed and possibly pursue criminal charges. But my guess is that once they realize how much evidence you have, they will back off. What about the special election? That is your best bet for a peaceful resolution. If you can get new board members elected, they can settle this without litigation. Push hard for that election and make sure you have people lined up to run against Karen and her supporters. I left Jennifer's office feeling more confident. I had the law on my side, I had documentation, and I had a growing group of neighbors who were tired of Karen's abuse. The February 14th meeting was held at the community clubhouse, a small building near the entrance of the subdivision. I arrived 15 minutes early and found the parking lot already packed. The normal attendance at HOA meetings was maybe 10 to 15 people. Tonight, there were at least 50. I walked into the clubhouse and saw that extra chairs had been set up, but there still were not enough. People were standing along the walls. Karen was at the front table with the other 4 board members, and she looked nervous. This was not the quiet, controllable meeting she was used to. At 7 o'clock, Karen called the meeting to order. She tried to follow the normal agenda, starting with approval of the previous meeting's minutes, but she was immediately interrupted. "Point of order." It was Robert Chen, standing near the front. "Before we proceed with normal business, we need to address the special election petition. State law requires you to schedule the vote." Karen's face tightened. "The petition will be discussed under new business." "No, it needs to be discussed now. You cannot delay this." There was a murmur of agreement from the crowd. Karen looked at Gerald, who just shrugged. She clearly had not expected this level of resistance. "Fine. The board has received a petition for a special election signed by 17 homeowners. According to the bylaws, we are required to schedule a vote. The election will be held on March 7th. Nominations for board positions will be accepted starting tonight and closing on February 28th. Is that satisfactory? Robert nodded and sat down. I felt a surge of hope. We had forced Karen into scheduling the election, and now we just needed to get the right people to run. Karen tried to move on to the treasurer's report, but she was interrupted again, this time by Patricia. I have a question about recent fines that have been issued to multiple homeowners for minor violations. Is the board targeting people who speak out against HOA actions? Karen's face flushed red. The board enforces violations according to the bylaws. If people are being fined, it is because they are in violation. Really? Because I was fined for having Christmas decorations up past January 15th, but I took them down on the 14th. The photo evidence the HOA provided was from my neighbor's house, not mine. That seems like selective enforcement to me. There were murmurs of agreement, and several other people raised their hands with similar complaints. The meeting was quickly spiraling out of Karen's control. Then someone near the back shouted, "What about the frozen pipes? Who is paying for my flooded basement?" That opened the floodgates. Multiple homeowners stood up and started demanding answers about the pump house, the drainage problems, and who was responsible. Karen tried to blame me, pointing at me and saying I had sabotaged HOA infrastructure. But Robert Chen stood up again and held up the original subdivision plans. The pump house was supposed to have its own electrical service from the beginning. The HOA never installed it, and instead, they illegally tapped into Mr. Jensen's power without his consent. He had every right to disconnect it. The flooded basements are the result of HOA negligence, not Mr. Jensen's actions. The crowd erupted in arguments. Some people were yelling at Karen, others were yelling at me, and it was complete chaos. Karen was banging her gavel and shouting for order, but no one was listening. Finally, Deanne Foster stood up and raised her voice above the noise. "Everyone, please, this is not productive." The facts are clear. The HOA board, under Karen's leadership, made several serious mistakes. We tapped into a homeowner's electricity without permission or compensation. We did not properly maintain critical infrastructure. And we have been issuing retaliatory fines to silence dissent. These are not the actions of a board that serves the community. I am calling for Karen Whitmore to resign as president, effective immediately. The room went silent. Karen stared at Diane in shock. Gerald started to say something, but Diane cut him off. I make a formal motion for a vote of no confidence in Karen Whitmore as HOA president. I second the motion, said Michael Perry, one of the other board members. Karen looked like she had been slapped. You cannot do this. That is not in the bylaws. Deanne pulled out a copy of the bylaws and flipped to a marked page. Section 8, subsection C. Any board member can be removed by a majority vote of the full board for conduct detrimental to the HOA. I am invoking that section. Karen was scrambling now, flipping through her own copy. Gerald was looking at the bylaws too, and his face had gone pale. Apparently, they had not expected anyone to actually use that provision. This requires a formal hearing process, Karen said, her voice shaking. You cannot just spring this on me without notice. You are right, Deanne said. The bylaws require written notice and a hearing. Consider this your written notice, delivered verbally in front of witnesses. The hearing will be held at a special board meeting on February 21st, 1 week from today. In the meantime, I move that Karen be suspended from her duties as president pending the outcome of the hearing. I second that motion, Michael said again. All in favor? Deanne asked. 3 hands went up. Deanne, Michael, and Sandra Hutchins, who had been silent until now but apparently had reached her breaking point with Karen. Opposed, Karen and Gerald raised their hands, but they were outvoted 3-2. The motion passes. Karen, you are suspended as president. Gerald, as vice president, you will assume the duties of president temporarily. This meeting is adjourned. Karen stood up so fast her chair fell over backward. This is illegal. I will sue all of you. You cannot do this. But people were already getting up to leave, and most of them looked satisfied with what had just happened. Karen grabbed her papers and stormed out, with Gerald following behind her looking shell-shocked. I stayed behind to talk to Deanne, Michael, and Sandra. Thank you for doing that. I know it took courage. Deanne smiled. It has been a long time coming. Karen has been abusing her power for years, and this situation with you was the final straw. We should have stood up to her sooner. What happens now? I asked. Now we try to fix the mess she created, Sandra said. Starting with getting the pump house repaired and properly set up with its own power. And we need to reimburse you for the electricity you paid for. And drop the bogus fines and the lawsuit threat, I added. Absolutely, Michael agreed. The board will meet this week to address all of that. Can you put together an invoice for the electricity costs and the electrician you hired? Already done. I will send it to you tonight. Over the next week, things moved quickly. Gerald, now acting as president, proved to be much more reasonable than I had expected. He scheduled an emergency board meeting and invited me to attend. At that meeting, the board voted to reimburse me for $373 in electricity costs, plus the $200 I had paid the electrician to disconnect the service. They also formally rescinded all the fines that had been issued to me and issued an apology. The HOA hired a plumber to repair the pump house, which cost nearly $8,000. They also contracted with the power company to install a proper dedicated meter and service line, which cost another $3,000. The total bill for Karen's cost-cutting scheme was over $11,000, not counting the legal fees they had already paid their attorney. Several homeowners who had flooded basements filed claims against the HOA's insurance, and the insurance company started their own investigation into how this had happened. When they discovered the unpermitted electrical work and the negligence involved, they were not happy. The HOA's insurance premiums were going to go up significantly. On February 21st, the formal hearing for Karen's removal was held. She brought her own lawyer and tried to argue that she had done nothing wrong, that she had acted in the best interests of the community, and that the board's actions against her were a conspiracy. It did not go well for her. Deanne, Michael, and Sandra presented all the evidence: the unauthorized electrical connection, the lack of compensation, the retaliatory fines, the unpermitted work, and the building inspector's violation. They also presented testimony from multiple homeowners who had been unfairly fined or harassed over the years. The vote was 4-1 to remove Karen from the board entirely, with only Gerald voting in her favor. Karen threatened to sue, but her lawyer quietly advised her that she had no grounds and that pursuing it would only expose her to further liability. The special election was held on March 7th as scheduled. I nominated Robert Chen for president, and he accepted. Deanne chose to run again for her seat. 3 other homeowners who had been active in the Facebook group also ran for positions. When the votes were counted, Robert won the presidency with 78% of the vote. Deanne kept her seat. 2 of the other reform candidates won as well. Gerald chose not to run for re-election, and Sandra retired from the board citing stress. The new board was made up entirely of people committed to transparency and accountability. Karen showed up at the March meeting where the election results were announced. She sat in the back with her arms crossed, glaring at everyone. When Robert was sworn in as the new president, she stood up and walked out without saying a word. That was the last time I saw her at an HOA meeting, but the story did not end there. In April, I received a call from a detective with the Denver County District Attorney's office. Apparently, the building inspector had referred the case to the DA for possible criminal charges related to the theft of utilities. I met with the detective and provided all my documentation. He told me that theft of utilities was a misdemeanor in Colorado, punishable by fines and potentially jail time. The DA's office was considering charges against Karen personally, since she had been the one who authorized the electrical connection. I asked if I wanted to press charges, and I thought about it carefully. Part of me wanted to see Karen face consequences for what she had done, but another part of me just wanted this whole thing to be over. The HOA had reimbursed me, the board had been replaced, and Karen was no longer in power. Pursuing criminal charges would mean more time, more stress, and more involvement with the legal system. In the end, I told the detective that I would support whatever decision the DA made, but I was not going to push for prosecution. The detective said they would likely offer Karen a plea deal for a fine and community service if she admitted wrongdoing. I never found out what happened with that, but I assumed she took the deal because I never heard anything more about it. Life in Pinewood Heights slowly returned to normal, or at least a better version of normal. The new HOA board under Robert's leadership was transparent and responsive. They published detailed budgets and meeting minutes. They set up an online portal where homeowners could submit concerns and track how they were being addressed. They reviewed all the fines that had been issued over the past 2 years and refunded several that had been unjust. The Facebook group evolved from a secret resistance movement into an open community forum where people could discuss neighborhood issues and plan social events. It turned out that when people were not living in fear of their HOA, they actually enjoyed being part of a community. As for me, I learned some valuable lessons. I learned that standing up to bullies, even institutional bullies like an HOA board, is possible if you document everything and know your rights. I learned that most people want to do the right thing but often need someone else to take the first step. And I learned that my neighbors were actually pretty great people when they were not being intimidated into silence. My electric bills went back to normal. The pump house got its own power supply and continued to function without incident. The drainage problems were resolved, and the homeowners with flooded basements were compensated by the HOA's insurance. I even started attending HOA meetings regularly, not because I had to, but because I wanted to stay informed and be an active part of my community. Robert did a great job as president, and the board actually became a force for good in the neighborhood instead of a source of fear and frustration. There was one final piece of satisfaction that came months later. In June, I was working in my home office when I saw a moving truck pull up to a house 3 streets over. I did not think much of it until I was out for a walk that evening and saw the house. It was the one Karen had lived in. I ran into Deanne a few days later and asked if she knew anything. She smiled and said, "Karen sold her house and moved out of the subdivision. I heard she bought a condo in Aurora. No HOA." We both laughed at the irony. The woman who had lorded her power over the HOA for years had been so thoroughly defeated that she fled to a place where she would never have to deal with one again. Looking back on the whole experience, I realized that it had started with a simple electric bill and a principle. I could have just paid the extra money and avoided all the conflict. A lot of people told me I should have. But sometimes the right thing to do is not the easy thing. Sometimes you have to stand up for what is right, even when it is hard, even when it costs you time and stress and money. The pump house still sits in the corner of my property, now properly heated with its own electrical service. Every time I see it, I think about the battle that was fought over it and the changes that came because one person decided to say no to an abuse of power. My electric bills are normal now, around $200 a month, just like they should be. I never got rich or famous from this experience. I did not win a huge lawsuit or get any kind of windfall, but I got something more valuable than that. I got my community back. I got neighbors who talk to each other and help each other instead of living in fear. I got an HOA that actually serves the homeowners instead of ruling over them. And I got the satisfaction of knowing that when someone tried to steal from me and then bully me into silence, I stood my ground and won. Not because I was smarter or richer or more powerful than the HOA, but because I was right, and I was willing to fight for what was right. In the end, the pump house was just a pump house. The electricity was just electricity. But the principle behind it, the idea that you do not get to take what is not yours and then punish people for objecting, that was worth fighting for, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. The next winter came, and the pump house stayed warm with its own properly installed electrical service. The pipes did not freeze, the basements did not flood, and life in Pinewood Heights continued peacefully under new leadership. Sometimes I still think about that moment when I made the decision to disconnect the power. I knew it might lead to the pipes freezing. I knew there would be consequences. But I also knew that giving in to the HOA's theft would set a precedent that they could do whatever they wanted without accountability. So I made the hard choice, the choice that would force a confrontation rather than just accepting injustice. That decision led to chaos, conflict, legal threats, and a lot of stress. But it also led to real change. It led to a corrupt board being replaced. It led to other homeowners finding their voices and standing up for themselves. It led to a better community for everyone. Years from now, when new families move into Pinewood Heights, they probably will not know this story. They will not know about the battle over the pump house or the HOA president who abused her power for years. They will just know that they live in a neighborhood with a responsive, reasonable HOA that treats homeowners fairly. And that is exactly how it should be. Because in the end, this was never about me or Karen or any individual person. It was about the principle that communities should be governed fairly, that people with power should be held accountable, and that ordinary homeowners have rights that cannot be trampled just because an HOA board decides it is convenient. The pump house still sits in the corner of my property, humming quietly on cold winter nights, keeping its pipes warm with electricity that the HOA pays for. It is a small structure, hardly worth noticing. But to me, it will always be a reminder that sometimes the smallest things can spark the biggest changes, and that standing up for what is right is always worth it, no matter the cost.